Good morning, everyone. Once again, Nun Beis Amid Aleph. We are on GITTEN, Mesechus GITTEN, Perach Hamishi. Zok the Mishnah, Yisomin Shasam Chayitza Balabayis. If you have Yisomin or Asomi Chayitza Balabayis, the Balabayis is taking care of them. Shaminal Hanavi and Apotropos, so the father appoints an Apotropos, as we'll see in a second, seemingly also if Beis Din appoints an Apotropos to deal with their affairs. Chayav Lase Perusem. So this person who's taking care of the Yisomin, the Apotropos, or the Balabayis, is Chayav to take off Chumas and Maestros from the produce of the Yisomin, so that they don't end up eating tevel. So now there's a separate discussion, and we'll get to this in the Gemara as well. When the apotropos, when the yisomim get bigger, so now the apotropos no longer is taking care of them. So the question is, do the apotropos need to swear when the yisomim become big? Let's say 13. Do the apotropos need to swear that they didn't steal anything? Well, maybe not that they didn't steal anything in the past, but that they don't now currently have any of the stuff that really belongs to the yisomim. So apotropos shemino avi. So the Mishnah says it depends who appointed the apotropos. If it was appointed by the father, then they have to swear yishava. Minu Beis Din lo yishava. If Beis Din appointed the apotropos, then they don't swear. Says Abba Shol Omer Chiluf Dvarim. It's the opposite. If Beis Din appoints them, then they swear. If the father appoints them, then they don't swear, and we'll see in the Gemara what the machlokes is. But in the beginning of the Mishnah, we said that the Yisomin are some chayitza balabayis, so the balabayis or the apotropos are chayiv to take off meiser. But now we have a brisa that seems to imply that no one else can take off trumas and meiser for somebody else. Umini atemvelo shutfin, your partner can't take it off. Atemvelo aris, and the sharecropper can't take it off. Atemvelo apotrupin, you and not the apotrupin. Velo atorim etchena shalo, you can't take off trumas and meiser for somebody that's not yours. If it's not yours, you can't take it off, you need to take it off yourself. So how can the apotropos take it off for the Yisomim? What it means is seemingly that lahachil, if you need to take it off so that they can have something to eat, then it's okay to take it off for the apotropos, for the Yisomim, and for somebody else. But if it's something where you just go ahead and it's lahaniach, so then that wouldn't be okay. So for instance, in this case, if you were just taking off the chumas and maestros and then putting it into the storage house, and then later on the Yisomim will go ahead and eat it in a few years from now, so then wait till they get bigger and they'll separate it, put it in the storage house without taking off chumas and maestros, and they'll take care of it later. But if your mamish need the food now because they have nothing to eat, so then of course you can go ahead and separate chumas and maestros for them. V'hatanya, Rashi says b'nichusa. We have a proof for this. We have a support for this. Apotropin, torbin, chumas, tormin, umaistrin lahachil, v'lo laniach. That's our proof that we have. You see that if as long as it's lahachil, you can do it for someone else. Now we're going to go through a long brisa, the rest of this brisa, which is going to give us other dinim of apotropos. But we have the proof that we needed, that in this case it's okay for the apotropin to take off chumas and maestros for the yasom, because at the end of the day they need food to eat. But let's see the rest of the rules. Similarly, the apotropos can go ahead and sell behemas, avadim, shvachos, batim, sados, krumim, vineyards, and fields that belong to the yisomim if they need the money to feed the yisomim. Avalol aniach, not just so that they'll have money, not just because, okay, the prices are good in Thornhill now, so let's sell the house now. That's not okay. That's not a good reason. But if you need the money to go ahead and feed them, then it's okay to sell. Oh, Viter, Mochel and Peros, you could sell their fruits, yenos, shmanim, their oil, their yayin, uslatos, their flour, lahachil, avalol haniach. Weiter. They also have a right to buy for them a sukkah, tzitzis, lulav, arav, and anything that has a limit, lasuye shofar, to include shofar. Now what's interesting here is that it's a given that if the yisomim are bar mitzvah and they still have an apotropos, which they don't necessarily need a bar mitzvah, but that's a separate discussion. But if they're bar mitzvah, if they're not bar, so if they're bar mitzvah, then they're chayiv to buy it. So you don't need to tell me that the apotropos buys it for them. The Rishonim point out that seemingly this is talking about even before they're bar mitzvah, when it's only a mitzvah dirab, for them to take sukkah, for them to sit in a sukkah, for them to take a lulav, for them to wear tzitzis, seemingly. Even when it's only mitzvah d'Rabbanan, the apotropos still has a right, as long as there's a set limit on a price, it has a right to go ahead. And we'll see what that means, a set limit on a price. There are certain things like tzedakah where there is no set limit. Something like that doesn't have a right to give tzedakah on behalf of the yisomim because you can give an unlimited amount of tzedakah. But an arava, a sukkah, a lulav only costs so much. Yes, they're different prices, but they only cost quote unquote so much. So that stuff you can buy for the yasom who's a katan, even though it's only mitzvah d'Rabbanan. Torah, tefillin, and mezuzos. Again, tefillin or mezuzos even before their bar mitzvah. Chol davar sheyesh lo kitzur lasuya megillah. By the Megillah as well. V'in poskin alei and tzedakah. However, you don't start giving out tzedakah from their money. The apotropos doesn't give out tzedakah from the money of the Yisomin, and they don't start to redeem captives. They don't go ahead and give money to Avelim, because again, at the end of the day, there is no shortage, and once you give them the right to do so, they will use up all of the Yisomin's money. It's very easy to be very fluent with other people's money. Apotropos doesn't have a right to go to court, whether lachov or lischos b'nichsei. They don't ever go to right to go to court for the yisomim. Lischus amaylo. Why can't they go to court? And if they win the case, so then they want money for the yisomim. What's the problem? Ella, no. It means, of course, that if they go to court and they win money, then the yisomim get to keep it. Ella lachov amenas lischos b'nichsei yisomim. Rather, it means that if they go to court in order to get money for the yisomim and they end up losing the case, so then the yisomim don't have to go ahead and pay the money. So it's very interesting. Basically, if you're a Baal Din who's going to go up against yisomim, you're better off, if you want to keep your money, you're better off not going to din against Yisomim, because it's a no-win situation. If you go to court against Yisomim, if they take you to court again, assuming you agree to go to court, etc., so if you go to court against Yisomim, if the Yisomim win, then you have to pay them the money, and if the Yisomim lose and they have to pay you money, then it's not enforceable in law, because it's not enforceable until the Yisomim get older. That's what the Gemara says. Ein apotropin rashayin limkor berachov v'ligo b'karav b'ra v'ligo b'yafa. So too, seemingly, again, this is not to feed them. This is just now for smart business deals. We said to feed them, you can sell anything. But let's say now you're an apotropos, and you're taking care of their stuff, and you think that there's a closer field now. They have a house which is far away from the shul, and it'll be more convenient for them to buy a house closer to the shul on Galecrest. So you want to sell their house further away and buy one that's closer. You're not allowed to do that, especially by a sadda, let's say. We're talking about a sadda here. Or if you think that they have a sadda that's not really worth so much money, and I can get them a mitzvah, I could sell the sadda and then get one that's really a prime location, prime development, you can't go ahead and do that. Why not? My time at a deal in Mishnatfin. Because maybe at the end of the day, the new land is not as good as you think. Maybe it'll become damaged. Maybe it's not a good location. Whatever they have, they have. If it's not great, so then you won't be blamed, but you can't go ahead and start swapping their land. And similarly, if they have land in general, and again, just to reiterate, if you need to sell it to get them food, then you can do any of this stuff. But assuming that you don't need to, so now they have land, and now you want to buy avadim. You want to make your life a little bit easier, so you want to sell their land and buy avadim. You can't do that. Why? Because seemingly sadeh is more fit than avadim. Sadeh is something that's going to be more permanent. Avadim is more temporary. But if you have avadim, so the avadim are eventually going to get older, so the avadim you can sell the apotropos, because if you're going to sell avadim and get land, that's something that'll really last them for a long time. No, you can't even sell avadim to get land. Why? My time a deal malo mishafion. Because what's going to happen? Maybe you're going to buy the land, and what's going to happen? Maybe the land is not going to sit still. What does it mean it's not going to sit still? It's not so pashut. Maybe the land has a tain on it. Maybe somebody has a claim on the land. Next thing you know, you're going to sell the avadim which they had, even though they're only temporary for 120 years. But you're going to sell the avadim. You're going to buy the land. Next thing you know, somebody's going to come and say, "Oh, that land belongs to my land. That land is my land." It sounds like a song. That land is your land. Whatever. That land is my land. And lemaisa, they're going to take away the land, and therefore you can't sell the avadim stuff. You can't sell the somim stuff to buy sados even. Similarly, interestingly, an apotropos can't go ahead and let an eved go free. Why would you think you let him go free? So Rashi explains, even if the Eved's going to buy himself out, even if the Eved's willing to poda himself, and that might be beneficial for the Asum, he can't. Why not? So Rashi doesn't say because it's not going to be beneficial. Even if it's beneficial, you can't, because Lamaisa, the apotropos doesn't have a right to give him a get shichur. And if the apotropos doesn't have a right to give a get shichur, he doesn't have a right to go ahead and free the Eved. He can't go ahead and take money from the Eved, because the Eved is going to be stuck anyway. But if it's beneficial for the Asum, then what can he do? Then the apotropos can sell the Eved to somebody else. So then he sells it to somebody else. That person gives money to the apotropos, which is really going to the Yisomin. So now they got the money for the Eved, and now the other person can go ahead, and if he wants to free the Eved, it's okay, and that's why the whole thing works. Rabbi Omer Ani, no. He argues and says, no, even the apotropos himself can take money from the Eved, because once you take money from the Eved, for all intents and purposes, can give himself a get shechur, and he can free himself because he bought himself free. Now, this is still part of the Brisa, but seemingly this is a different discussion. You need to go ahead and make an accounting at the end. And the way Rashi explains it, it seems to be going back to our Mishnah, the case we were talking about, whether they have to be Yishava or not. In our Mishnah, we had a machlokes, whether it's Beis Din or not, but this is just talking about the general idea. Does anybody need to be Yishava when they're finished? When the apotropos is finished, and now the Yisomim get big, does anybody need to finish? So Sarich Lechashev Iman B'Achrona means whoever was the apotropos, again, Bein Beis Din, Bein Yisomim, and we'll get get to the exact details a little bit later. But somebody needs to swear. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Omer Eino Tzarech, that the apotropos doesn't have to swear at the end, that he doesn't have any of the stuff that belongs to Yisomim. That's a machlokes. Einos an apotropos nashim avadim uktanim. You can't make an apotropos who's a nashim. Why not? Because as Rashi explains, it's not sanua. Seemingly, he doesn't say sanua, but she's not the type that's going to go ahead and go out there and going to do business on behalf of the Yisomim. You can't have avadim because the avadim are not ne'emanim. They're not believed. We don't trust them. Uktanim, they don't have the right bardas. But if the father, before he dies, decides that he wants to appoint one of these people, nashim avadim uktanim, as the apotropos, so he has the right to do whatever he wants with his kids. Hu apotropos. Now we have some stories. Hu apotropos have b'shvivusei de Rabbi Meir dava kamizavin arasa v'zavin avdei. There was an apotropos in the neighborhood of Rabbi Meir who would sell land and buy avadim. Seemingly, we said before, ein apotropin rashayin limkor sados v'likach avadim. So why was he allowed to do it? V'lo shafke Rabbi Meir, and that's why Rabbi Meir didn't allow him to do it. The problem is, in this case, achvilei bechame, God came to him in a chalom and said, ani laharos v'ata livnos. The reason that I'm trying to have the apotropos sell the land and buy the avadim is because even though it's not good for the thing, I'm trying to punish the Yisomim. Either their father did something wrong, or the Yisomim themselves did something wrong, and you're right, it's not good for them, but I dafka want it to not be good for them. Says Rabbi Meir, afilu hachi lo ashrach. Rabbi Meir still didn't listen to the dream. Why not? The famous idea, Amar divrei chalomos lo ma'alin v'lo marin. And this comes out many times in Shas. We don't paskin based on dreams. So Rabbi Meir says, I'm not going to paskin halacha, which would have been the halacha to say, okay, he's allowed to go ahead and sell the sados and take avadim, even though that might be what God wants. I don't paskin based on dreams, and therefore I'm not going to allow the guy to sell the sadah to take avadim for the Yisomim. Hanu beitrei de igre behusata. Separate story. There were two men who incited each other the satan. That means that the satan used to get them to go fight a lot. They had a minhag. The minhag was that every Friday afternoon they would go out and they would get into a major argument. That was based on the satan. So Meir said, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go start hanging out with them on Friday afternoon. They're not going to get into a fight while I'm there. Akvinu. So every Friday for 3 weeks, Rabbi Meir would go hang out with these two people that are known that the minhag is that they were going to fight every Friday afternoon. And he would hang out with them for those 2 hours that they usually hang out. Why they're hanging out every Friday afternoon is a separate discussion. But they hang out Friday afternoon. Rabbi Meir goes to join them and says, okay, we're going to hang out. And now they don't fight for 3 weeks in a row. What happens? He takes away the power, the chazaka of the satan. Shami dekamer. So he heard the satan say, Voy da'afka Rabbi Meir lahu gavram mi beisei. Unfortunately, by stopping me for 3 weeks in a row, Rabbi Meir was able to get rid of the satan. And now the two men lived happily ever after. So in this case, there was an apotropos who sold land and bought a shore. Now, we didn't discuss about buying a shore. We said you can't sell land and buy an eved. What about selling land and buying a shore? Seemingly that wouldn't be okay either. But they let him sell land to buy a shore. Why? Savalak Rabbi Yossi, because they hold like Rabbi Yossi. The time of Rabbi Yossi, Miyamailo karisi leishti ishi leshori shori. Don't read this wrong, or else you'll get in trouble. I never called my wife, and my shore, or my wife, my shore, my wife. Ela leishti beisi leshori sadai. I always call my wife my bayis, because we know that the wife is the one who takes care of all the tzarchei abayis. Uleshori sadi, and I always call my shore the sadeh. So he's explaining why was it okay to go ahead and sell the sadeh to buy a shore. So the way that we shown him explain is because you need a shore in order to take care of the sadeh. If you don't have a shore, you can't work the sadeh. So it's saying it's not okay to sell all of the sados to buy shorim, but if you need to sell some of the sados in order to buy a shore, then you can then take care of all of the other sados. So that in fact would be for the benefit of the Yisomim, and that would be okay. There was a safta, an elderly woman taking care of the Yisomim. Havalahu torsa, so they had a cow. So we don't know the halacha is if you could sell a cow or not. Shaklav is avinta nialayu. So she sold the cow for the Yisomim. Asu krovim l'kamid Rav Nachman. Amrulei maya vidite dezamna. How did she sell the cow? Amar lehu. So he said, what do you mean? Yisam shatzam chayitza bala bayis. Now we saw in our Mishnah that if they're somech, even if she's not an apotropos, she has a right. If she's taking care of them, she has a right to take care of their dealings. V'ha Aiker says the Gemara that the Krovim said back, but Lamai says she sold it and then it went up in value. So if it went up in value, the Yisomim should be able to get the difference in the value. It says, what do you mean? It went up in value, but he already sold it. The Lokeach already owns it. So this is going to be the beginning of a new discussion. But the buyer has not yet paid the money. There's 3 different ways to buy something. There's paying money and not doing Mashicha. There's doing Mashicha, bringing it towards you and not paying money, and then there's paying and doing Mashicha. Once you pay and do Mashicha, for sure it belongs to you. There's a whole discussion whether if you do Mashicha and you don't pay, or if you pay and don't do Mashicha, whether it belongs to you or not. V'halo nikite dami, if they haven't yet collected the money, that means that the Yisomim sold the cow, and the person did Mashicha, but the buyer did not yet pay them the money. So then, Amar Lahu, Im Kain Hainu Rav Chanila Bar Idi Amar Shmuel, Da Amar Rav Chanila Bar Idi Amar Shmuel, Nichse Yisomen Harein Kehekdesh, V'lo Mikne Ela Bekaspa. If in fact the person did not yet pay the money, even though they did Mashicha, you're right, then the Yisomim have the right to take back the cow and to then resell it at the higher value that it's now worth. Now, this whole thing, we need to have a little bit of a background. I'll give you a 2-minute background, and then when you chazer tonight, or this afternoon, when you chazer the Gemara, so you'll be able to write out your own chart. I wrote out a little chart over here for myself, but if you chart this stuff out, it makes a lot of sense. So we said, Mashicha and payment, for sure, it belongs. I don't think it's in the art school, I'm not sure, I'm sorry. But I'll send it to them for the next edition. Mashicha and payment, it belongs to the person who's Moshechet, who pays. Nothing to talk about, up, down, whatever it happens. It happens to be, interestingly, somebody once told me that by airline tickets, if you buy an airline ticket and then the price goes down, so supposedly you can call up the airline and they're supposed to refund your money. But I've never tried it before, but that's what I've been told. What?
24-hour cooling period.
No, even after 24 hours, if it goes down at any point. That's what I was told, but the Maisa, nobody ever does it, so it doesn't matter. So let's talk about Mashicha without payment first, because that's what we're going to talk about first. Mashicha without payment. That means the person takes the stuff, but doesn't yet pay with it. So by most things, Mashicha without payment works. It doesn't work by Hekdesh. That's a discussion here by Hekdesh. By Hekdesh, Mashicha without payment doesn't work. You have to actually pay for the Hekdesh. But for our case, a regular sale where somebody does Mashicha, the general klal by Mashicha is once the Mashicha is done, the sale is final. That means if I come into a deal with you and I say $100 for this Gemara, as soon as you take this Gemara, even though you haven't yet paid me for it, if the value changes, neither party can back out. If it goes down in value, you can't give it back to me. If it goes up in value, I can't demand it back from you. Once Mashicha is done, neither party can back out. What we're going to see here, again, is that by Hekdesh, even with Mashicha, you could still back out. So when we keep saying over here, like we just said over here, Kehekdesh, harein kehekdesh, that means that sometimes we're going to treat, if it's to the benefit of the Yasom, sometimes we're going to treat a case where Mashicha without payment, we'll treat it like Hekdesh, and we'll say that even though in a case where there's Mashicha without payment, we usually say that it's the deal is final and no party can go back, we're going to treat it for the benefit of the Yasomim sometimes as Hekdesh, and we'll let the Yasomim go back and renege on the deal if it's to their benefit. So in this case, for instance, right, what happened in this case, just to give an example, the Yasomim sold the cow. The person did Mashicha on the cow. So in a general case where a person does Mashicha on the cow, so when the value of the cow changes, neither party can go back. If the cow goes up in value like it did here, the seller can't go back and say, I want my cow back. In this case, says the Gemara, and this is the din that we're going to go with the whole time, Rav Chinoli bar Idi Amar Shmuel says, Nichse Yisomin Harein Kehekdesh, and even though the guy did Mashicha, since he didn't pay for the cow yet, we can treating the cow like Hekdesh, V'lo Mikni Ela Bekas, but since it's to the benefit of the Yisomim now, since the cow went up in value, it's to the benefit of the Yisomim to get the cow back. We're going to treat it for the Yisomim that the Yisomim can renege on the deal, and even though the guy did Mashicha, and in a general case of Mashicha, they cannot renege on the deal, the seller, in this case, since the seller was the Yisomim, we're going to let them renege on the deal. And now we're going to go through all of these cases.
How long does the Yisomim have?
What?
What's the window?
Until the guy pays.
No, I'm saying, the cow goes up in value.
Until the guy pays. Until the guy pays for the cow. Remember, the case is Mashicha without payment. Until the guy pays for the cow, the Yisomim can go ahead and say, I want it back. Once he pays, that's the difference. In a regular case of Mashicha, it's right away. You do Mashicha, the Gemara belongs to you. Okay, I can bring you to BAYT after 30 days if you haven't paid me yet. But at the end of the day, I can't renege. But in the case of Yisomim, if you do Mashicha and you don't get paid, once you pay, I have no taina, even as a Yasom. But if you do Mashicha and you don't pay it for the cow, like in this case, so then the Yasom, we treat it like Hekdesh and we let them renege on the deal. So let's plug in all of the rules now. Chamrei, where are we? Is that what we're up to?
Hekdesh will come.
Yeah, Chamrei de Ravana.
Chamrei de Ravana Ukva Yasma Mashchua. So there was Chamrei of Ravana Ukva, who was a Yasom, and Mashchuha. So what happened here? This is a case, again, Mashicha without payment, and this is a case of Yisomim selling stuff. So the purchaser, again, we're going to deal with Yisomim selling, buying, and then Yisomim selling and buying on payment without Mashicha. This is a case of Mashicha without payment of the Yasom selling stuff. So Yasam Sel, the purchaser did Mashicha, similar to the case of the cow. So they did the Mashicha, and he was an orphan. So they did the Mashicha, they took the wine of the Yasom, $4 a barrel. The Iker went up, Vikam B'shita Shita, and it went up to $6 a barrel. So what did we say? If the person does Mashicha, then in general you can't go back. By the case of the Yasom, if it goes up to 6, then the Yasom can renege on the deal, and they can say, I want my barrel of wine back, and then they can resell it for 6. Also, the Kamed of Nachman, Amar Lahu, Hainu, Drav Chinoi Bar Idi, Amar Chinoi Bar Idi, Amar Shmuel, Nichse Yisomim Aryai Kehektish, V'lo Makne Ela B'Kasp, and therefore the Yisomim, when selling here, can renege on the deal. What about the other way? Mashoch Pire Miyasme, similar case. Somebody bought peiros from the Yisomim, Iker, then it went up in price. Hainu Drav Chinoa Baridi. Again, the Yisomim can renege on the deal because the price went up. What happens if the price goes down? So now the price goes down. So we said in general what? We said that once somebody does Mashicha, they can't go back. So when it's not to the benefit of the Yisomim here, when the price went down, so if the guy was able to return it, it would be to the detriment of the thing. So then we talk about the din being the regular din. Once the guy does Mashicha, he can no longer renege. So Zol, Lo Yehe Koach Hed Yod Chamor Mehektish, we're not going to be more machmir in this case in a regular case, and therefore the purchaser can't renege. So again, Yasum is selling stuff, price goes up, Yasum can renege. Price goes down, buyer can't renege because a regular case, a buyer can't renege. Amshachu lehu peire liyasme. Now we're going to go the other way. So before we go the other way, there was a question.
How long is a person considered a yasam? I mean, what's the cutoff? You like 10 years later, you're still the inheritor, but what is it? When you're selling stuff off, what does that mean?
Maybe one can argue that until they reach bar mitzvah, maybe
provide for themselves.
Right? Maybe until they until they reach bar mitzvah. We're dealing with the case over here where seemingly the apotropos did it. Seemingly we're dealing with the apotropos doing it. Once you're doing it yourself, so maybe there would not be as much leniency. So now we're doing the opposite. Now we dealt with the Yisomim. Again, if you chart this out, it works out glot. Now you're dealing with the Yisomim buying stuff. So the apotropos was Moshech peiros for the Yasom without paying for it. Again, once he pays for it, there's nothing to talk about. So now what happens? So now Iker, if the price goes up, so we know what? That really the seller in general can't renege. So too over here, when the Yisomim buy stuff and the price goes up, the seller can't renege because it's no different than any regular case. Now when the price goes down, so what would I say? The benefit, when I'm buying stuff and the price goes down, so the benefit of the Yasom would be what? To say that they can renege on the deal, even though in general you can't renege when the price goes down. As the buyer, in this case, since it's Yisomim who are doing the buying, they should be able to renege. Savar mina hainu drav china baridai, so that the Yisomim can renege. But we made a gezerah over here that no, even though the Yisomim you would think can renege, we're going to make a gezerah that the Yisomim can't renege because it's actually for their benefit not to be able to renege. What do you mean? The price went down. But there's another factor. What's the other factor? Amalei Rav Shisha Breda Ravidi Hara Hiladidu. If we let the Yisomim renege in a case where they buy stuff and the price goes down, it's not going to be good for them long term. It might be good for them now to be able to return the item, but it's not going to be good for them long term. Why? Because if the Yasom can renege in general when buying stuff, then they're going to need peiros. Nobody's ever going to give them the stuff. They're never going to let them do Mashiach on credit, because I know as a seller, if I do Mashiach on credit to you, a Yasom, and then the price goes down, you're just going to be able to return it to me. So in general, for the benefit of the Yasom, even though you might have thought the benefit of the Yasom is that even in a case where they buy stuff and the price goes down, they can renege on the deal, it's really not to their benefit because then nobody's going to sell them stuff. And therefore it comes out that by a Yasom on credit.
But that's the only limitation, really.
That's the only credit, on credit. If it wasn't on credit, and we said there's nothing to talk about in any of these cases. So it comes out, just so that we're clear, Mashicha without payment, there's 4 possible cases. Selling stuff. So if the Yasom are selling stuff, price goes up, Yasom can renege. Special case by Yasom. If the price goes down, then like a regular case, the buyer can't renege. By buying stuff, if the price goes up, so then the seller can't renege by a regular case, just like a regular case. If the price goes down, even though you might have been tempted to say that the Yasom can renege, then the Yasom we treat like a regular person who can't renege because it will be detrimental to them if we let them renege, because then nobody will ever sell them stuff on credit. See, it's glot, as long as you figure it out first. Fine. Says the Gemara. Now we're going to go the other way. Now we're going to go payment without Mashicha. Now the din by payment without Mashicha in general is the opposite. By Mashicha we said the general klal by most cases is nobody can renege. And we need to come up with exception with the one case where the Yasom can renege when he's selling his stuff and the price goes up. The opposite is true when you pay and don't do Mashicha. If I just give you money and I don't do Mashicha, so the din in general is that both parties can go back. Giving you money doesn't mean anything until I actually take the stuff into my possession. So both parties is the given is that both parties can go back. We'll see, maybe that'll change in a case where it'll be beneficial for the yasam. So let's do the 4 cases now, of 2 of buying and 2 of the yasam selling. Yasve, Yayive, after this, it's all easy stuff from here, after we finish this. Yayive Yasme Zuze Apere. So now this is a case where the yasam, now we're starting with the yasam buying, not selling. The yasam is buying peiros without doing meshicha. So in general, when you buy peiros without doing meshicha, both parties can renege. That means that if the price goes up, so who's going to want to renege? Then the seller is going to want to renege. If the price goes down, then the buyer can renege. In general, both parties can renege. Either party can renege in a regular case of payment without meshicha.
We don't buy a...
Well, let's see for a second what happens with the yisomim. Yayiv Yasme Zuze Apiri. So the yisomim bought produce, peiros, and they didn't do meshicha. So now the price went down. Zol, so seemingly, lo yeh koach chaydir chamim in a hektish. There's no reason that the yisomim can't renege. The yisomim should be able to renege just like a regular person could renege. What happens, Iker? Now, if the price goes up, so savar mina hainu de Rav Chinali baridi. So you might have thought that when the price goes up, and the Yisomim are buying stuff, even though in general both parties can renege, one would be tempted to say that in the case of the Yasom, where he bought stuff, where he paid for it without doing Mashicha, one might be tempted to say that the seller cannot renege and we treat the Yasom differently. That's what one would have been tempted to say. However, says the Gemara that when the price goes up, we still allow the seller to renege because it's for the benefit of the yasam. How is it for the benefit of the yasam? Listen to this interesting svara on the bottom of the page. Amalu Rav Shisha Breda Ravidi Harahi Liditu. It would be bad for the yasam if you don't let the seller renege when the price goes up and the yasam's buying stuff. Why? Because then the seller can say that your stuff burnt in the aliyah. What does this mean in English? So this means as follows. Again, if I'm selling you stuff and you're paying but you're not doing mashicha. So we said both parties can renege. So if I sell you stuff and you don't actually take it into your possession and you pay for it and then there's a fire in my warehouse, so who's responsible? Me, the seller, because you as the buyer can just renege. There was a fire and you can go back. Says the Gemara, that would be true. However, if you would tell me that the din is that in a case of a yasom, the seller cannot renege after the yasom pays, so then if there was a fire, you would have to agree to me that since the seller couldn't renege, you'd have to agree that if there was a fire, it would be the responsibility or the loss of the yasom. So what's going to happen? You're going to say it's to the benefit of the yasom to say that the seller can't renege in a case where the yasom is buying stuff and then the price goes up. We don't let the seller renege. I'm going to tell you it's not really to the benefit of the yasom. It might sound like it is, but it isn't. Because if you tell me the din is that the seller can't renege in that case, even though in a regular case the seller can renege where there's payment without mashicha, what's going to happen? You have to agree to me that if something happens to the produce before the yasom actually does mashicha, it's going to be the responsibility of the yasom. Because at the end of the day, we're not letting the seller renege. So what's going to happen? You're going to think you're doing a benefit by saying that the seller can't renege, but what's going to happen? The guy's going to have it still in his stuff, because again, the yasom paid for it. It's going to be in the seller's house. Unfortunately, the seller's house is going to burn down, and what's he going to do? He's not going to save the stuff, because he doesn't care, because it's not his. So it's going to end up being detrimental to the yasom. So even though you're tempted to say that the seller should not be able to renege in a case where the yasom buys it by paying without mashicha, since the seller then will have to admit, you'll have to admit to me, the seller will have the taina to say the stuff burnt and it's your loss. Therefore, we say that the seller can renege in a case where the yasom buys stuff even when the price goes up.
That's the same as the value going down. They can renege if it gets burnt and destroyed.
Say that again?
It's the same as if they could renege on when the value of the wheat goes down. It's been destroyed, so they back out of the deal. We always go towards the Yisomim.
No, because the difference is that when the price goes down, we're not going towards Yisomim, we're going towards every single regular person. A regular person, when the price goes down, can also renege. The point is that when the price goes up here, so if you tell me that a regular person can renege, that's fine. So now it's the responsibility of the seller to watch his stuff from fire. But if you're going to be machmir in this case and say that the seller, in fact, cannot renege, all of a sudden now the buyer, the yasom, has the responsibility to watch over a thing he can't watch over it. It's not in his property. And the mitzvah is going to be detrimental to the buyer. So that's the yasom buying, payment without mashicha. The final case we have is now the yasom selling to somebody else who pays without mashicha. What's the case? Now the yasom is selling his stuff. The other guy does payment without mashicha. Now in general, both cases we said payment without mashicha, both parties can go back. So what happens when the yasom is selling stuff and there's payment without mashicha? So says the Gemara, Iker, if the price goes up, so if he's selling, who's this to the benefit of? Then the yasom's like a regular person, and the yasom can in fact renege like any regular person can. Iker lo ye and the seller, the yasam can renege, because anybody can renege when there's payment without Mashicha. Zol, we're going to have a similar thing. So you're going to tell me, in a regular case where the price goes down, again, the Yasam sold the stuff and the price goes down. So it would actually be beneficial now for the buyer to be able to renege on the deal, and that's the regular case. Zol, you might say that no, in the case of the Yasam who sold stuff and the price went down, even though in general a buyer can renege, maybe, you would argue that by Yasomim it's different and the buyer can't renege. Says the Gemara, the problem with that is that it's actually going to be detrimental to the Yasam. Why is it going to be detrimental? Because if you tell me that when Yasam sells stuff to a person and the price goes down, even though in general the buyer should be able to renege, in this case we're not going to let the buyer from a Yasam renege, what's going to happen? Then nobody is going to ever buy from a Yasam, because the Maisa, they're not going to want to pay without Mashiach, because the Yasam is always going to be able to just renege. And therefore, at the end of the day, even when there's payment without Mashicha, even though in general both parties can go back, so we're going to let the buyer over here go back as well in this case, or else nobody's ever going to buy from a Yasam if you can always just go ahead and, if we say that the buyer cannot renege. I'd rather buy from somebody else if I can renege. I'd rather pay somebody else without Mashicha and be able to renege than pay a Yasam without Mashicha and not be able to renege. That's what the Gemara says. Okay. We finished that discussion. Do your charts at home when you're chazering this afternoon or tonight. But let's go weiter. Fine. Easier from here. Amar Rav Ashi, 7th line. Ana Rav Kahana chasmin an ashtara. I and Rav Kahana signed on the star of the Ime de Zeira Yisama. We signed on the star of the Ima of Zeira Yisama. It's interesting. It's called Zeira Yisama even though he has a mother. Seemingly when you don't have a father, you're Yasam even though without a mother. I thought it was both. So the mother of Zeira the Yasom had a star, and she wanted to demizavna ara lekarga below achrazasa. She wanted to sell the land of the Yasom without an announcement. Now we said in general you can't sell the land of the Yasam. The difference is we said you can sell it lahachil. Well, over here the guy was coming around and he was collecting a head tax. So what happened? So the mother went ahead and sold the land, but she didn't make an announcement. What's the problem with making an announcement? We know that when you use a broker, usually people sell privately, but when you put an ad in the paper, chances are you'll have more bidding, you'll have more buyers, you'll have more price, you'll have a higher price. So the taina over here was that they signed on a star and they let the mother sell without 30 days notice, without putting it into the MLS or whatever it's called. Says the Gemara, that was okay. Why? No, that there are certain times you're allowed to sell right away. If you need food, like we said before, if they need to eat, or if you need to bury somebody, or if you need to go in and pay the head tax, because you can't say to the guy from the government, oh, can you just wait 30 days, do me a favor, we're just going to try to get a better price. No, you can't do that. So in this case, she was allowed to sell it right away, because Lamaisa, there was no way to tell the head tax collector for the government that they should come back in 30 days. But in general, you're right. If you're going to sell the land, under the circumstances, you're allowed to sell the land. If you're going to have to sell the land, so then it's better to do it for 30 days, to have advertisement in 30 days to get more money for it. Amram Siva Aputropa de Yasmihava. Amram the dyer, D-Y-E-R, was an apotropos of Yisomim. Asur Krovim Lakamid of Nachman. So the Krovim came to Nachman and they said, Amar Lei, Kalavish Umachse Miyasme. This guy never wore fancy Harry Rosen suits before. All of a sudden he becomes the apotropos of the Yisomim, and now he's wearing a Harry Rosen suit every day. He must be using the money of the apotropos. He must be using the money of the Yisomim. Amaluki Hechi de Lishtam and Mile. No, that's okay. You can use the money of the Yisomim to buy Harry Rosen suits, because what happens when you look nice, we know. When you look nice, now people are going to want to do business with him on behalf of the Yisomim, and it'll be beneficial for the Yisomim in the long run. Then they said, wait, okay, it's one thing to tell me he needs to buy nice suits, but the guy doesn't have to have a steak for breakfast every day. The fact that he gets fat, that's not going to help him do business on behalf of the Yisomim. The guy's clearly, as Rashi explains, velo amud, he has different mishatim, but the guy's clearly going beyond his means. There's no way this guy can afford, this pasha guy, no way he was able to ever afford steaks. You tell me you need to take some money from the Yisomim to buy a nice suit, fine. But to go ahead and take money, he's taking all this money from the Yisomim to buy and eat steaks every day. Says the Gemara, Eimer Mitziashach. No. Rabbi Nachman says, no, we have to assume that the guy won the lottery, and he's not using, we don't have to be choshe that he's using the Yasom's money. But then they say, well, now the Krovim Taina, well, the guy's not taking care of the fields. He's not hiring the right gardener, he's not cutting the trees. In that case, says Rabbi Nachman, if you go ahead and you bring me proof that he is not taking care of the Yisomim's property, then I'll remove him. Seemingly, I just understood this to mean that if you can bring proof, obviously, that he's stealing from the Yisomim, we'll remove him as well. But we don't assume that he's he's stealing, unless we have reason to believe so. But once you can prove that he's stealing from them, or that he's not taking care of their stuff, so then we can remove him. To Amar Afuna Chavrin Mishmei Derav Apotropos Dematsin Masakinom Ne to Idmar Apotropos Demafsid Rafuna Marav Masakinom Le. We get rid of him. To Beir Reb Shila Amar Lo Masakinom Le V'Hilchsa Masakinom Le. If we have an Apotropos who's not taking care of the Yisomim the way he's supposed to be, the halacha is that we get rid of him. This is the interesting discussion. Now, if you remember in the Mishnah, we had a machlokes that if an apotropos is appointed by the father, then he needs to swear at the end of the time that he didn't take anything. If he's appointed by BAYT, then he doesn't have to swear. And the other opinion was if he's appointed by the father, then he doesn't swear. And if he's appointed by BAYT, then he does swear. Let's see the svara. It's very interesting. My time, what's the reason that if he's appointed by the father, he should have to swear? Now, again, the given would be, if I asked you, so then in a perfect world, we would say that the apotropos should always have to swear.
What's he swearing for?
He's swearing that he's swearing that he's now done taking care of the Yisomim, and he's not taking any of their stuff. He doesn't have any of the stuff in his possession. It's a termination that basically, it's not even swearing that he used it right, or assuming that he did whatever he had to do at the time, but we're assuming that the car that he's driving now is actually his car and not belonging to the Yisomim. So he needs to swear that at the end of the day, now that his relationship is over with the Yisomim, he's not taking any of their money, any of their stuff, and going to go into the sunset. So, my time, what's the reason he needs to swear? He loved this because again, unless you have a reason to tell me he shouldn't swear, then I'm assuming he's going to have to swear. He loved this. So the svara he says here, interestingly, is that there must have been some type of relationship between the apotropos and the father if the father went ahead and appointed the apotropos, and therefore they were seemingly friends, or they knew each other, or the guy had done a favor for him at some point. Therefore, by making the guy swear, he's not going to not go ahead and be the apotropos, even though he has to swear. He has a relationship with the father. Even if you make him swear, he'll still do the relationship. He'll still be the apotropos and he'll swear. But however, minu beizin lo yishava. But if beizin needs to appoint an apotropos, so if we make every apotropos swear, then nobody's going to want to be an apotropos for beizin. They have no relationship to the father. They have no relationship to these yisomim. I'm not willing to become the apotropos if you're going to make me swear every time. Milsa be'amahu de'avid lebeidina v'iramis ala shua asilim nuya. You're never going to be able to find an apotropos, and therefore we don't make the apotropos for beizin swear. Abashol omer chilov tavarim, the opposite. Why? My time, minu beizin yishava. He's saying no, the opposite. That when beizin appoints, you actually make the guy swear. Why? It's not just that the guy's not going to want to become apotropos. The guy will still want to become an apotropos even if he has to swear. Why? Because what happens when you become a Beis Din apotropos? So now all of a sudden on your resume you can write what? I was an apotropos for Beis Din. Beis Din trusted me. Now everybody's going to want to do business with me. So there is a benefit by being an apotropos. Once you have the benefit of being an apotropos, you're willing to swear for that benefit. My time I minu Beis Din yishava b'hiana de kanafik ala kala de inish mehamnehu. Because once he becomes an apotropos, everybody's going to say, oh, this guy must be a trustworthy guy. Beis Din's appointing him as an apotropos. He's willing to take the swear. However, if the father appoints him, he says you don't swear because we're not assuming the guy has a relationship with the father. The father just picked the best person he could find, not necessarily a friend of his, and therefore, if we make anybody that the father appoints swear, then nobody's ever going to want to be the apotropos for the kids. Tanya, however, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov they both swear, and that makes sense because one can tie in both ways why they should swear. We said the reason that you should have to swear by the Beis Din, we make him swear because the guy's going to still do it because he gets the benefit of everyone knowing that he's a trustworthy guy that Beis Din appointed. And the reason that will make the person who was appointed by the father swears because we assume that there must have been some type of relationship that the father had with this person, and if we make him swear, he's still going to be ahead. He's going to go ahead and be the apotropos. Says the Gemara. Tani Rav Tachliva Bar Rava Kamed Rav Ua V'Trav Shemino Avi Yisomim Yishavim Neisha who knows say schar Amarle At Isis Kava V'Kilas. What do you mean the guy's getting schar? Nobody ever suggested that the apotropos gets money. Ela Eim Neisha who can say schar. No, he's like he's getting money. What does that mean? Because the Lamai says we said he has some type of relationship with the father, and therefore he's going to swear. So again, the halacha seems to be Hilchsa Kaba Shaul, that only in the case where minahu Beis Din you swear, but there are those who argue, which would seem to speak to me a little bit more, that either way you make them swear because both of them are getting benefits. The guy appointed by Beis Din is getting the benefit of being known as a trustworthy guy, and the person that was appointed by the father seemingly would still be willing to swear because he has a relationship. Let's just see the Mishnah here.
And the apotropos isn't allowed to collect payment for being an apotropos?
So it sounds like in general the halacha is, it sounds like he can't collect payment, but it sounds like in general he doesn't necessarily get paid from the father beforehand. It's not like the Gemara was suggesting maybe he got schar from the father, like a down payment
but he can't
beforehand.
Take from the estate.
Well, seemingly, no. If he's appointed, seemingly, I don't know the exact halacha, but seemingly he could get some type of money from the estate, I'm assuming. Yeah. Exactly. I don't know exactly. Zok the Mishnah. Hamitame v'hamidame v'haminasech b'shogeg pater b'mezid chayiv. If you do any of these things, b'shogeg your pater, b'mezid your chayiv to pay. What does that mean? Hamitame, Rashi says, means if you have truma, that belongs to you, you probably have to give it to the Kohen unless you're a Kohen, and I go and I go na 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 na, and I touch it with my tame hands, and I make the whole truma tame, I have to pay for that. Or what happens if you have chulin, and I take some truma and I go na 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 na, and I mix the chulin, I mix the truma with your chulin, so now that stuff's not tame, he can sell it to a Kohen, but he needs to sell it at a discount to a Kohen, because regular stuff I can sell to anybody. Stuff that's mixed with truma, I can only sell to a Kohen. And finally, the worst case scenario is v'hamenasech. If I make your yayin into yayin esech, and we'll need to see exactly what that means in a second. Itmar. So the Gemara doesn't question the first two. If you go in your matame somebody's stuff by making it tame, the truma you make it tame, or if you mix truma with chulin, so in that case, if you do it on purpose, you need to pay the difference in the value that the guy can no longer sell it or can no longer use it. What's the case of menasech, where I went ahead and I made yayin esech? So itmar menasech, Rav amar menasech mamish. Rav says you actually were menasech mamish. L'shem yuchu kucha brichu shechinte. You go over to the guy's stuff and you pour it for avodah zara. The other Shmuel amar ma'ariv. Shmuel says no. Menasech doesn't mean that you actually went ahead and served it for avodah zara. It means you took other yayin nesach and you mixed it together with his good yayin. But either way, it's now asr ba'na. Mandi amar ma'ariv lo amar menasech. This is an interesting svar. The one who says that you actually the cases where you mixed yayin nesach with the guy's regular wine, he doesn't say menasech, because if it's true that you went over and you said l'shem yuchu kuchu brichu shechinte, and you went ahead and you actually did yayin nesach, you poured it to avodah zara, why would you not have to pay in that case without seeing the Gemara? Because what happens if you pour yayin nesach? You're chayiv misa. If you're serving avodah zara, you're chayiv misa. So we know there's a rule of kimle b'derabamine. So it can't be, says the Gemara, according to that svara, according to the one who says that it meant that you mixed the two. It can't be that you actually poured it, because if you poured it to avodah zara, you'd be chayiv misa. We're not going to make you chayiv tashlumin, because kimle b'derabamine, when you have two penalties here to pay for the wine and to die, you end up dying. Says the Gemara, that's what I just said. Let's say it inside. Amar lacha menasech kimle b'derabamine. So the guy who says ma'ariv says it can't be a case of menasech, because if it was a case of where the guy really did menasech, there'll be nothing to talk about tashlum and even b'mezid, because the guy's going to die. Ve'idach kid Rabbi Yirmiyah. No, the one who says menasech will tell you no, you have it wrong. You're right. If the guy would pour it to avodah zara, then we would say kimle b'derabine. What does it mean in the Mishnah that the guy needs to pay? It's that it was a two-step process. What does it mean? It was a two-step process. To Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah mishas hagbahu dekana. What did the guy do? He didn't just take the wine and pour it to avodah zara. He picked it up and acquired it for himself. What happens when you pick it up and acquire it to yourself? Gezel. Now he's got to pay for the gezel. Right afterwards, mischayev b'nafshu lo haviyat shas. Then he pours it to avodah zara. Since he was chayav for the hagbah, for the gezel first, in that case, that's the case we're talking about b'mezid chayav. But you're right, in a chanami, he agrees that if in the case you would just take it and pour it straight over to avodah zara, you stick your hand in there and pick it up for avodah zara, so then you pour it straight with avodah zara without picking it up, in a chanami, you'd be kimle drami, you would only get misa. One more line. So now you explain to me why the guy was noted to say that it's ma'arev and not menasech, because menasech would be kimle b'derabine, and the guy who said menasech explained to you that it's a special case where you can come up with the circumstances that it wouldn't be kimle b'derabine. The one who says menasech, why would he be hesitant to say that the case was ma'arev? So he says amar lecha ma'arev hainu medame. Because ma'arev, if you tell me the case is that the guy mixed the yayin nesech with regular wine, what's the difference between that and mixing truma with chulin? It would be the same exact din. And basically you'd be telling me the same thing twice. You'd be telling me a guy who's metame stuff, that's a separate case. But now a guy who mixes truma with chulin, or a guy who mixes yayin nesech with regular wine, he's chayiv tashlumin. It's the same exact case. So that's why he holds it must be that the case of menasech is not that you mixed the yayin nesech, so you actually poured it to the avodah zara. How can you be chayiv? No, the case is where you picked it up and then you poured it, so you were chayiv for the gezel, you have to pay, and then you poured it. The other person who says ma'arev, so how's he going to answer? Why is ma'arev not the same as medame? He'll say to you, no, it is. Ve'idach knasuhu miknasa lo yalfinan. You're right, but the problem is that even though it's the same exact case, mixing truma with chulin and mixing yayin etzach with regular yayin is exactly the same case. You need to teach me both of them, because we know that by a knas, which is what this din is, we penalizing the guy for for ruining the wine. If you would just tell me that we're penalizing him for putting truma with regular stuff, yes, you could say that the case of yain is exactly the same, but the rule is that by knas you need every single case to be spelled out clearly. And I can't learn from the case where I put truma into chulin, I can't learn, even though it's exactly the same parameters as the case where I put yain nesef into regular wine, I can't learn because miknas lo yalfinan. And therefore you're right, eina chanami, ma'ariv, and menami, the same exact case, but I need to tell you both of them, because if I only told you medame, I would not be able to tell you that in the case of ma'ariv, you would have to pay. But eina chanami, ma'ariv is not a case where you poured it for avodah zarah, because in that case, hard to believe that he picked it up first. In that case, it would be kimle b'dravnei b'dichai misa, and therefore the case in the Mishnah means ma'ariv, where you took yayin nesech and you poured it into the guy's regular yayin and ruined it, and therefore you'd be chayav tashlumin.